Thank you so much, and thank you for having us join this discussion and to follow the previous discussant, I think, who set the table, so to speak, for this whole issue of the changing world of work and the challenges we face. We're going to take a little different approach, but I hope it's all will come together in the picture by asking our first speaker who's not here. So how about technology? She's not physically here. She's come down with a bout of malaria, so she's in India. And I'm going to ask Reema Nanavati. She will speak to us via video. We hope the technology works. But in looking at the world of work, quite often we focus on the formal sector. I know that the data are invariably collected from actors within the formal sector, but another alarming statistic, I think, is roughly, on average, 1 in 4 women in the world are actually economically engaged in the informal sector. So Reema is going to share with us some of the work that they're doing in India with women at the base of the pyramid. The organization SEWA focuses exclusively on women in the informal sector, and she will try to tackle this question from their perspective. So specifically, she will look at this, given the fact that advanced technology is creating turmoil from their perspective in the world of work. What or how can the experience of working with informal workers show how they're being impacted and perhaps point us to some potential solutions? So with that, I'll ask our technology people to share, first of all, a short video to give us an overview, and then Reema will respond to the question. Are we good to go?
गुजरात में तो मानते हैं कि हम मेहमान को अतिथि देवो भव, हमारे में ऐसी बहुत खासियत है कि हम मेहमान को बहुत अच्छी तरह से रख सकते हैं। आजे आनंद आनंद रे आनंद मारी मंडली सुरेंद्रनगर देश में 65,000 मेंबर है। उसकी इनकम नहीं होती क्योंकि खेती में काम करते हैं, पशुपालन में काम करते हैं। तो हमें नया रोजगार क्या देना है? तो हमारा नया रोजगार एडमिन के साथ जुड़े, हम सब एक में, तो हमारा काम का भी प्रचार होगा। ये अगर अपने घर में ही रहकर आगे बढ़ेगी तो दूसरों को खिलाने के साथ साथ उसको खुद को ही रोजगारी मिलेगी। हमारे मेहसाणा डिस्ट्रिक्ट में एयरबीएनबी की शुरुआत 3 घरों से हुई थी। आज तक हमारे घरों में अलग अलग देश राज्यों में से 100 से भी ज़्यादा लोग आ चुके हैं। उससे हमारी इनकम 1.5 लाख से भी ज़्यादा हुई है। हमें तो रोजगारी मिली, लेकिन हमारे साथ साथ हमारे गांव की जो युवा पीढ़ी है उन्हें भी रोजगारी मिली।
कोई पण तकलीफ आए तो મને એવું લાગે છે કે અમે સામનો કરી શકશું કેમ કે અમારા પાસે સેવા છે।
Okay, Reema, over to you.
Good evening and good afternoon. Thank you so much for allowing me to join virtually. And it was fascinating to hear, the previous speaker, the study, and the question that you posed. So I'm going to talk on behalf of the 1.9 million poor women workers in the informal economy. And to the question that you asked, that, how does technology really disrupt the work of the informal sector? What is the impact of it? It depends on how you deploy technology. So we always believe in putting technology into the hands of the women, and they know exactly how to use it best to their advantage. So at SEWA, we always believe in how do you turn adversity into an opportunity. And I'm going to, as you saw in the video, especially for the women who are at the wheels of the pyramid, I wouldn't say base of the pyramid, but who are the wheels of the pyramid, and the younger workforce in the informal sector, which is coming into play. And how do you partner with some of the platforms, the Amazons of the world, the Airbnbs of the world? And we found that, these women have their homes, these women have their traditional culture, heritage, skills, and how do you turn it into a livelihood opportunity using the platform economy. So we started with listing 10 rural homes on the Airbnb platform, and today I think we have over 100 plus homes which are listed on the Airbnb platform. Of course, women then start using technology. So they all have smartphones and iPads where they receive the reservations from the guests all over the world. And on an average, they receive 8 to 10 guests per month, and which leads to approximately 18 to 25,000 Indian rupees of income per month. And this has not only helped revive the old traditions and culture, but the rural youth feel really excited. They find dignified jobs and work in the sectors of travel and tourism, into hospitality, into traditional arts and crafts, into culinary. And otherwise, these young boys and girls may never have been able to go to a hospitality course. But now they are learning, they learn new languages, they learn new skills, and now we are introducing experience tourism, heritage tourism. So having seen these positive examples and experiences of using a platform, we're also now training the young daughters to also use the e-retailing platforms, and then logistics, transportation, barcoding, data analytics. These are the new sectors which are throwing out more and more employment opportunities. Thank you so much. I am sorry if I overshot on my time.
Thank you, Rima. We certainly appreciate it, and we'll come back in the event of any questions. I'm now going to turn to Alexa Roscoe. Alexa's with the International Finance Corporation. And basically, I know that the IFC has been taking a look at women in new sectors. So it's all about innovating and finding new opportunities. Can you tell us a little bit, 30,000 foot, what is it that IFC has found? But from a strategic perspective, where is IFC going to be putting its focus? How are you working with the gender program in the World Bank to get some traction and to bring the third sector and the private sector along? I know you work on the private sector side, but governments and policies as well in order to push that forward.
So what we find, I think, in picking up directly from what Rima was saying, is that we're talking about technology and its impact on women. It's not just about the technologies per se, but it's also around the business models and how those business models are regulated. So just starting from where the IFC is coming in, we're trying to work with the private sector to say, okay, maybe you have a gender and HR program or a gender and tech program for your staff. How can we think about what your technologies are doing for women as well, both from the technology itself and also the business model of how that's implemented. So we actually started also working as well with the platform economy, and to do like a very, very specific deep dive, we started working on ride hailing, both because it's a sector where women are very underemployed, but also because transportation itself is such a catalyst for women's broader economic participation. And we did a study looking with data from Uber and with Accenture as a partner, actually looking at ride hailing in 6 countries. So that was Mexico, the UK, Egypt, South Africa, India, and Indonesia. And I'm going to give a 30-second version of a very long report, so sneak preview. And that really found that both the opportunities of this new technology and the barriers were very different for men and women. And on the opportunity side, we did see that women found it a bit easier to get into ride hailing because of the app. In other words, it's a lot easier to register on an app than it is to go through the formal kind of taxi, often that might be a monopoly or that might be a very male-dominated network. Similarly, we did see women's incomes boosted quite substantially in compared to men's, partly because they were coming from a lower starting point, right? And then lastly, on the mobility side, we just saw really huge increases that women said they were actually about 25% of the women we surveyed, which were about 11,000 women, said that they felt they could get to new destinations and move more freely, specifically because they had access to ride hailing. That being said, they also face some really distinct challenges as well. So particularly around things around barriers to entry. So when we asked both men and women what's the biggest barrier you felt to get to signing up on the app, women said that it was access to finance, whether that was leasing a car or buying a car, or even if they had a car but they couldn't get access to the insurance portion. And that was keeping them from signing up at the same rate as men. And then of course there's also like the really soft bit around like social norms, where men didn't want women to drive, there weren't a lot of women drivers. And last but not least, safety issues really came to the fore. But interestingly, they came to the fore both on the barrier and opportunity side. In other words, when we asked women, okay, what's the biggest thing you'd like to see companies improve on in this sector, everyone said safety and security across the board. But then we asked them, okay, what is the thing you like best about ride hailing? Why do you take this as opposed to other options? Everyone also said safety. It's much better because of the tracking, because you can share your location. So it's what we're really seeing, to take these lessons up a bit more broadly. What we're seeing is that the technologies do, themselves can influence women, but you still need that ecosystem change, and it's not necessarily a good or bad picture either way. So at the World Bank Group, we're working with individual companies, but also with groups of companies. So with our Digital to Equal initiative, we have 18 companies in the platform economy working together on these issues. And then, of course, also at the economy and legislative level.
So there's the opportunity to scale, but we'll come back to that. Yes. I look forward to doing that. So now I will ask Ellie. And I won't mangle your last name if you don't mind, Ellie, but you're with Equileaps, so please forgive me about the name. But you have also done some analytical work and you've collected data, and in particular from the perspective of public companies. I'm very, very keen to know what you're finding out in terms of transparency and consistency and quality of gender metrics, but then also what are the actions that need to be taken? Because data are not an end in themselves. To me, it really comes down to representation, to voice, and that's what drives equity at the end of the day. So can you share with us some of your perspectives based on your findings?
So my name is Ellie Siapkidu. I'm the Director of Research at Equileap. We're a non-profit organization, and our mission is to accelerate gender equality in the workplace. So we're looking at the formal sector. We have devised a methodology that includes 19 metrics. These are female representation across all levels, so not just looking at the boards, but also senior management, executive, and the workforce. We look at work-life balance metrics, such as, for example, publication of the gender pay gap, providing a living wage to employees, provision of parental leave by the companies themselves, and availability of flexible work arrangements, both in terms of schedules and in terms of locations. We also look at a number of policies that promote gender equality, such as having an anti-sexual harassment policy, a supplier diversity policy that promotes women-owned businesses, a human rights policy, equal opportunities policy, and also we see whether a public listed company has signed the United Nations Women Empowerment Principles, or if they have undertaken a gender audit. So these 19 metrics, the Equileap scorecard, as we call it, is our tool against which we assess publicly listed companies. We focus on the largest companies, the ones that have a market capitalization of over $2 billion, so really large companies from the 23 developed economies. We research, we evaluate them, and we rank them. And we use this ranking to underpin financial products that can be used by impact investors and sustainable investors. So to come back to the issue of transparency and how how technology is changing this, what we see is that unfortunately companies do not seem to be picking up on the tools that technology offers. For example, We see still not a large part of our data set are, for example, offering flexible work arrangements or flexible schedules and locations to both genders. A lot of the companies still see this as a way to help women back after motherhood, which is a very narrow perspective because we're looking more into, the future company, the future organization that would enable both genders, both to have parental responsibilities and to work flexibly. We also feel that progress is quite slow. In our first report, the average score of the top 200 companies was 53%. It increased marginally in 2018. And a short preview from our data set, which is not yet finalized, but still we're looking in the 50s. So 57, 58% of the is the average score of the top 200 companies. So we do feel that we need better data from the companies, more disclosure, more transparency. And we also think that the governments have a role to play. For instance, we see that in Australia, where there is the Workplace Gender Equality Agency, where they call for large companies to publish a number of metrics on gender equality, you have much better data. In the UK, where now you have the Disclosure Initiative on the gender pay gap, you have better data. In France, where again you have the recent legislation, you have better data. So we feel that the private sector can push the frontier for both genders by implementing and publishing their best practices and through peer pressure, but also governments can facilitate that.
Thank you very much. And now I'm going to turn to Denise Wilson. Because you work a lot, you focus a lot on women on boards, so it's at the other end of the spectrum, so to speak. But can you share your perspective in terms of where do you see the change and how having better representation actually hopefully makes the world of work better for women?
Okay, thank you. Well, my name's Denise Wilson, so I'm Chief Executive of the Hampton-Alexander Review, which is the successor review to the Davies Review. This was the framework, the approach that the UK decided to adopt back in 2011 to increase the number of women, initially on FTSE 350 boards, and now the Hampton-Alexander Review has extended that out to 23,000 leadership roles in the Executive Committee and the direct reports to the Executive Committee. So it captures 3 layers of management: boards, Exec Committee, direct reports, and I think arguably is one of the most ambitious in terms of scope and depth reviews of any in the world. It's a voluntary regime that was intentional. I was part of the initial discussion group with the incoming coalition government in 2011, where we decided whether quotas, i.e. legislation, fines, penalties, or a more business-led, persuasive voluntary regime would be better for the UK. And we decided, obviously, on the latter. It has worked well for us. I mean, this is a difficult subject, and it's a very long journey. But we've seen considerable successes since 2011. Incidentally, in my corporate career, which began in the mid-80s, when we looked at the data through our research to kick off the Davies Review, there was not one more woman sitting on FTSE 350 boards in 2011 than there was in 1986. And I was a very big part of a lot of initiatives and drives and efforts, and thought throughout my career that this was all changing, and actually it hadn't changed by one single woman. Since 2011 to today, 2011 the FTSE 100 was at 12%, it's now at just over 32% women. The FTSE 250, slightly further behind, started at 9%, is now at 28%. By any measure, that is phenomenal progress. That is a huge shift in the gene pool in British boardrooms. There are 800 extra women sitting on FTSE 350 boards that without this initiative, without the collective inclusive efforts of everybody in business, that's CEOs, chairs, investors, governments, headhunters, I'm sure many of you in this room, we would not have made that progress. And those women, incidentally, would still have been waiting for their rightful place at those top tables in those senior leadership jobs. What was a seriously career-limiting water cooler conversation throughout all of my career is now a mainstream hot business topic. With a conference like this would just not have taken place as recently ago as 2010. So all of that is great progress. We still have a way to go. You know, the target for Hampton-Alexander for the UK is 33% by the end of 2020. Clearly, that's not gender parity. And so there's a phase or two and a lot more hard work and a long road to go ahead. But I would say the insights that we've got into the complex and compounding barriers that face not just women, but anybody who presents differently to a senior white male getting to the top of British business are very rich and now very deep. And many of these reports that others of you have been involved in have helped that. We still are finding no more CEOs in the FTSE 350 than we had in 2011. And the number of chairs, women chairing FTSE 350 boards, is only 28. So again, what is perceived as those very top, really important senior jobs are not going to women. But the pipeline is increasing, and the number of women at the top table in that conversation has changed dramatically. It is the biggest, I would say, change in post-war Britain in British business. We have a situation now where everybody knows the right thing to say. I hear leaders all espousing warm words of comfort. When we started in 2011, literally 1/3 of FTSE 100 chairs said, "Over my dead body will I put women on my board." They don't want it, they're not up for it, my peers won't accept it, blah. The issues we deal with are very complex.
That's diplomatic.
I don't know now one FTSE chair or CEO who would say anything other than they have great support for increasing women on their board and in leadership. Everybody knows the right line to play. And that's why reports and data are so important, because actually it's the only thing that matters. It's the only thing that tells the difference between those companies that are working really hard and have been doing for many years to shift the dial on women, and those that actually are just espousing words of comfort. So we publish by individual company every year, in November this year, how they're doing on the exec pipeline and on their boards.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll pause. Thank you.
We'll have a second round. Actually, on that note, precisely, I like the name and shame game, but this is where we also have to put some more teeth, and I think collectively we do it. I personally advocate for the fact that women control 90% of household purchasing decisions. We have tremendous buying power. It's time for us to do something about some of these things. With that, I will open it up for the audience, because we've had two back-to-back discussions. Dame Hunt remains in the room, so you can also address questions to her, and I would like to get us started. I will come to you, but we are talking about women in leadership, so please, I defer to, please, can we get a microphone over here? Anybody else? Yes, please. So we have two up here, and I see a hand in the back. Okay, so first, please, can you tell us your name and?
My name is Demet. I'm from EY. And I'm holding also a position at the board member for more women at board levels. So my question goes to Deniz. And I know you have accomplished significant progress along having more women in the non-exec roles, as you just mentioned. Congratulations. And I'm wondering your personal point of view in terms of achieving this progress with the quotas. I know there are good successes with the quota for gender representation in different countries. So assume there is a country, there is no quota or any progress, but there is lots to be done. So what would your point of view would be to enable this, with quota or without quota, and why?
Well, look, I think we have made great progress in the UK without quotas. Undoubtedly, legislation, quotas, fines, penalties, a very strict, legal, formal compliance regime drives progress faster. I'm not sure that it drives progress as sustainably. And as I said earlier, I think the insights we have in the UK into what is happening in the workplace on diversity as a whole are way beyond any other country. If you look, there is a credible house publishes every single week in the UK about UK business. And many other countries are not seeing that. We're also, you know, when we measure the UK, we're often measured against progress by other listed indexes. So, for example, the CAC 40. There are 40 companies in the CAC 40, and the statistic you will see for France with women on those 40 boards is 38%. You know, we're over 32% by a completely voluntary regime on 100 companies. And not far behind that on 350 companies. So we have huge scale. So it's quite difficult to measure, you know, we're not really looking at apples and apples. I think we need to look at what happens in this next stage, actually. This review ends in 2020. What do we do with those companies that are still all male executives, the 4 companies that refuse to put women on their boards, or all of those tokenistic one and done companies? You know, what about those? We have companies that are at 57, 8, 60%, but we have others that are in the laggard space. And I think that's where fines, penalties, delisting, removal of the chair are all very helpful. And we don't have those measures. We're powerful, but powerless in a way. And I think that's what needs to be thought about in this next stage.
Thank you. I'm going to ask everyone to make your questions really concise, and Seema will ask for the responses. Yes, you did. Dorothy, please.
Margot had mentioned the power of the consumer. So are we that powerless? But the question I wanted to ask you is to give us a bit more detail on these barriers that make it more difficult for people who are not white male to be in those positions.
Okay.
Can I ask you to, we'll group the questions, make it, please, yes?
Basma Al-Qassar, I'm the founder of the Women Mentor Forum. My question to Denise is, so congratulations on the progress made. And the question that we always get when we advocate for more women on board is what is it in it for us, you know, as for companies. And of course, we always talk about the economic factor, and the numbers always help us, even though when we're talking to men, sometimes they hear, but they're not really listening. So what I'm really interested in knowing, if you are collecting financial data, the economic progress, and how the increase of having more women on board, how it had affected the economic market in the UK. So this is what we, you know, be interested in, the financial numbers, the increase, and I'm pretty sure there is something to talk about.
Okay, thank you. We have one more question in the back, and then we'll go for a second round. So your question, please.
Yeah, it's for Dame Hunt if she's still mic'd up. It has to do with lifelong learning and training. And again, historically, our model has been the state plus or minus kind of funds education through to when one joins the workforce. At that point, it's the employer individual that kind of foots the bill. In the model you described, which makes it less sequential, which is, I think, the right way to think about things. How do you think about the role of the employer in this future going forward?
Okay. Since we have 2 questions for Denise, we'll respond to those, and then I'll ask you, Dame Hunt, to respond. Please.
Okay, so if I take the question about barriers and consumer power first. I think that's the consumer piece. I think that's a stage we've yet to get to. And I would tag onto that as well employees. You know, I would love to see employees using their power to choose where they shop, which university they choose to go to, as well as consumers, in terms of, you know, if you care about this stuff, if you care about equality, not just in the workplace, in society, then choose a company that backs it, that puts some serious dollar behind it and is really making progress. And we all have those choices. you can go and look at the gender pay gap on any company in the UK that has over 250 employees, not just company, any organisation. And now we'll have trend data. You can look and see who year on year is reducing that gap and who's actually doing nothing about it. So I think there's a very, very powerful consumer and employee piece to come, but I don't think it's been agitated yet. But just quickly on the barriers to women, as I said, they are complex and compounding. There is no silver bullet. This is much harder than we ever thought it was and a much longer journey. Basically, I think, if I could only have one or two, I would go to myths. Myths abound about women not being ambitious enough, about them having different leadership skills, around, when we've looked at the research about children holding them back, no, it's gender that holds them back. When we look, most of those myths are fantasy and fallacy, which is why, and the whole stereotyping piece, which is why campaigns such as #UnStereotyping and the work that many companies are now doing around imagery is very, very important. But essentially, it's bias. I don't think it's intentional. I think it's largely uninformed, unintentional. If I have one thing to say to men in the room, it's inform yourself on this topic. There is a huge amount of information out there, and women, actually, and women. Join the debate, understand what's going on. Bias, and we all carry those, holds women back. The issue is not the pipeline of capable, talented women ready and willing to take up big leadership positions, and the technology enables them. It is that they don't get picked.
Thank you. Have you received the microphone?
So, thank you very much. The technology team is perfect, so they've turned it right on at the right moment. So, the notion that you're responsible for the total experience of your employee, their onboarding, their professional development, and also their retraining is an old idea, but it needs application at a new scale. We were on last week with Amazon, which has a lot of distribution roles, and it now actively recruits for its distribution centers by promising that they'll help people out of distribution roles after they become skilled, so that as they're competing for this growth area of distribution capacity, they're also promising reskilling to help people exit. It's a single example, but they have been overwhelmed by the interest and demand. Similarly, a program that we support at McKinsey called Generation retrains young people who are NEETs. We're specifically looking for people who haven't chosen quantitative subjects, who may not have degrees, who are excluded from the workforce, giving them 6 weeks, 12 weeks of cloud computing training with AWS as an example, and then getting them placed in jobs. But those are still external to the job. Right now, most companies don't see reskilling, including for leaving the company, as part of their offer. And what I'd argue is the scale, 1 out of 4 jobs, means that employers will have to take it on. I also think from a policy side, the public sector could also innovate at scale. You think about 1 million people working for the NHS, millions of other colleagues, many economies where the state sector, the government sector is an employer of choice. Reskilling in the public sector is just as urgent as in the private sector. The economics work out very well in your favor as well to that argument for facts, but I would say that's a challenge to the room, both organizations and policymakers, to build it in to the learning and employment journey.
Thank you very much. We talk about these things, and cutting across it, we hear all the time, there's a business case, the point you're making. So why isn't this logic shifting bias? I want to ask Alexa to speak to, because IFC, we both worked for IFC at some point in our lives. In building the business case, what's driving your strategy there? And so while you think about the response to that question, I know we have a couple of other hands coming up. We've got one person here with the mic, we've got Arif, and we've got someone over there. Mindful of the time, it's going to be very quick. So while you receive your microphones, you've got your microphone? Yes? Can you kick off with your question, please?
Sure. So My name is Stephanie, and thank you so much. So you mentioned women in leadership, but we know that women of color face even more challenges. Do you think that the future should be to have a quota maybe for, not maybe women, but just people of color being in boards? Do you see that realistic and happening?
And one more question here, and then we'll go straight to the answers if you don't mind.
Thanks, ladies. My name is Maggie Buggy. I work for SAP and lead our innovation services and solutions business globally. My question is, do you see a danger of a perfect storm brewing for boards in that we see across our global client base the emergence of board members and search for board members who have digital experience, be it in the for CFOs who are proper cloud digital economic skills, be it COOs who really understand how to manage that environment. When we know that women in general are more disadvantaged in terms of technology skills, do you see that double whammy coming where they're doubly penalized? Because we see a big shift towards boards looking to staff business roles with executives who have that proper, complete up-the-chain experience of digital.
Thank you. One last question, and then we go to Alexa, please.
Okay,
you have the microphone.
Yep.
Sorry,
Okay.
I mismanaged that.
Okay, so no
please.
problem. My name is Salma Abbasi, and the question is for Denise. It's regarding governments and right skilling. I'm calling digital skills right skilling. With now the agreement signed in Africa, all the governments are now agreeing to trade more. There's a huge skill gap, and I see that it's an opportunity for women and an opportunity for the youth to actually fill that gap and take jobs through streamlined governments and bring in more transparency. Can you see any direction, any real action on ground there? Thank you.
Thank you. Arif, I'm going to beg your pardon. Please, Alexa, because we're out of time. Can we?
Certainly. So I want to pick up on these questions of consumer action, but also the business case. And I think that's important as we shift potentially to a bigger sharing economy and gig economy, what you have it, that we understand the business case not just for direct employees and leaders, but for this broader group of stakeholders. So going back again once to ride-hailing, what we actually found once we got the first ever numbers on where women drivers and riders are is that they're actually the core customers for ride-hailing. So women are about 41% of total riders, but are taking more individual trips, so account for the core group. However, in some markets like India or Egypt, they're only around 30%. So there's, of course, a huge market potential to grow ride-hailing by better serving women. And of course, what women want most, amongst other things, is actually more women drivers on the road. So you really have to get that positive, virtuous cycle going on. So I do think that you can really find that business case regardless of the sector that you're looking at.
Okay. And Vivian, I'm going to ask you to respond to the question here, and we'll close out with the one on board. So you had a question from?
Well, I think the answer is yes and yes. It's very clear that anything that you can do to systematically get more women, more young people into the economy is going to drive growth. And the great thing for historically underrepresented economies, if you think about Africa, ASEAN, LATAM, is that all skill levels will benefit. So even a tier 1 level skill, a little bit of education, a little bit of training goes a long way in a poor household. And that is, I think, a very good thing. And we're going to see more economic balance and more competitiveness, not just for the talented 1% or 2%, but also the average who are committed to their local community, both remaining in, but also want to be in their local community or village, but still want to find good, productive work. It's a good suggestion.
Thank you. And to respond to the last two questions, I'm going to ask Denise.
I'm just going to take the three, if I can, very quickly. Financial data question, yes, there's many companies now measuring financial data. Credit Suisse are one that's particularly good and have got some trends over several years to say, does this impact share price positively? Does it impact profitability? And the answers, of course, are yes, it does. Intersectionality and quotas for women and people of colour, I absolutely agree with the point. I think it is difficult for all women. It is incredibly difficult for women of colour. I think that, in this next stage, that's absolutely what we've got to tackle. And when I said, there are some pockets of spaces where we're not making significant progress, I would absolutely put women of colour into that space to think, well, what can we do more creatively in this next phase? And it may be quotas, it may not. I'm not a fan of quotas, but does it matter that some of these areas are not moving forward as they should? I absolutely think it does. Does it matter we don't have more women CEOs? Does it matter we don't have more women? Absolutely. So I think we just have to get creative. It's that building on, the progress and the learning we've made, and just being a little bit more sophisticated in these next few years to get those. So thank you. And I think the perfect storm was probably the last question. It's very unhelpful when boards say, I want a CEO, because we don't want 4 CEOs sitting on a board. We don't need 4 FDs sitting on a board. This is all part of the education, of the tugging at sleeves of leaders to say, look, boards are very different these days, and the benefits of diversity, that when you get a broad bench of skill sets, then everybody's performance picks up. So it's all part of the messaging, and we're working very hard there. I just perhaps close with saying, this is a very long journey, and it's a very hard journey, and it's taken time. But I think if you look back to where we were only a decade ago, the progress around the world, but in business particularly, in the UK, has been phenomenal. We've just still got a very long way to go.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the insights, and thank you. Thank you all.